entombed, ensilenced. The girl, fair-skinned, slim-ankled, a fever in her gaze, was seeing now only shadows writhing within other shadows. Her world lessened to the shifting, nimble dark. The ruins were whole, inside and out. The air of the irremediable hung darkly and majestically, like a bizarrely tantalizing smoke. The king masters, the king fashions laws, the king structures deaths. This much is true. And even now, in the war-haunted kingdom above, things are almost in order. Sitting amidst the stone and clay, she was motionless, stolen from the light. The noonday girl went into the desert, was bright and dripping with color. Not a fissure in the radiant enamel of the sky. She bent the knee and poured dust over the corpse. She wove a fragile, ephemeral, dissipating shroud for her brother of sand, dust, and those tiny rose crystals you sometimes find, the child with the savage, vicious, ancient eyes. She poured, and she sang, and she poured, and she poured, knowing without knowledge that her brother would come back to her, even if the blind elder didn't believe the resurrection of the flesh was all that desirable. When the tall mountains dance like petals in the hot summer air, and dead women ask for grace. They seized her. They told her she violated the law. They said she defied the edict not to bury the traitor, the brother who chose the wrong side of the war. And she wanted to scream at them that the laws were wrong, that the dead didn't care about ridiculous and human endeavors like that, except maybe, she said, nothing at all. The long, clean sheets of sand were beating all around her in the rising storm, like 1,000 wings, and something noble and peculiar was leaking into her mortal life. And she was just standing there, translucent and statuesque, already silence and stone. Listen, death itself coils, it shrieks in the face of this madness, not to bury, not to grieve, not to see the dead face. Gathering asphodels, I gave my life for your shroud. In the opacity of her first and the last defiance of the king's order, she was shredding the plain cloth of her dress, slowly, rhythmically. the rocks within her crumbling into the black oil of grief. Some asserted she always drew an ill fate, the girl with the night for a heart, captured, mesmerized, claimed by the impossible, moved by unknowable nocturnal forces. But she said fate was the executioner's song, and she didn't care for it anyway. Drained of the sunlight in the forever kind of way, blamed for but a fraction of what she'd done, the girl was caught in an act of holy mercy, and her laws weren't grotesque, they weren't senseless, they weren't disgracing the dead. Vessel and a volcano, she goes from one death to the next, closed, unbroken, her pride impenetrable, like stone within stone. Hers was the payment for mercy. Hers was the payment for dagger. In the love splintered by the betrayal, the dark birds flew out of her heart, and they pecked, and they feasted, and they clawed, and those who turned against her paid the last price before she even knew it. She was looking at the crimson trickling down her hands, thick and heavy, with a terror and a shining to it. The splitting of love, a hole in the blood, fractures the bones of life. The bones crack, the hinges undone. The double, the murder, and the mercy fracture the world. Rivers flow backwards. Fire goes black. Sacred milk curdles. The earth howls. It's becoming a grave. The murder and the mercy. When yoked together, these two things do not fit. They do not work, not even meant to. They pile ruin upon ruin. There's your crime. Weaving the ropes out of her tunic, the girl wasn't quite sure why her crime was invisible, inexplicably dissolved into the twilight. Yet her mercy, fatal, illumined by the brilliance of the day, filling the expanse of the earth and sky. Now her mind was under siege, as if she discerned at last something that made her darkling tomb intangible to her. She was seeing shrouds, linen as chaste as marble, a heavy brocade of bronze, a delicate silk, neither white, gray, nor black, but the ever-strange pearlescent hue that it's given by ashes. And she wanted to feel her brother's presence, just a flickering. But all she felt was the final, radical absence. And she was ready to go into the vast blackness that stretched out before her, into the heart of the monstrous and the indifferent that despises all that is human. She was ready to become one with this seeping oldness, this cold and dead and slippery and eternal thing that comes after grief. Between the desire and the spasm, between the rose and the scorn, is the noose.